My name is Caroline, and I'm 39 years old. 3 weeks ago, a hospice nurse I'd never met before pressed a small black USB drive into my palm and said, "Your husband recorded this the night before he passed. He made me promise to give it to you, but only after the funeral, only after everyone left." I remember staring at that tiny piece of plastic like it was a grenade with the pin already pulled. My husband Michael had been gone for 11 days. I'd buried him on a Tuesday morning under gray skies while his mother sobbed theatrically in the front row, and his sister glared at me like I'd personally stolen the last 47 years of his life instead of just the final 12. What I didn't know, what I couldn't possibly have known standing there in that hospice parking lot with my dead husband's secret burning a hole in my coat pocket, was that everything I believed about my marriage, about his family, about the sacrifices I'd made for over a decade, was about to be ripped apart and rebuilt from the ground up. And the person doing the ripping? It was going to be Michael himself, speaking from beyond the grave with a truth so devastating that 3 separate family members would need to leave the country to escape the consequences. I drove home in a fog that day, the USB drive sitting in my cup holder like a passenger I was too afraid to acknowledge. My house felt different without Michael in it. Not empty exactly, but wrong. Like a word spelled incorrectly that your brain keeps trying to fix. We'd lived there for 9 years, raised our daughter Emma there, hosted countless holiday dinners and birthday parties and Sunday brunches for his family. Always his family. I could count on one hand the number of times my own parents had visited, and that was by design. Michael's mother, Vivian, had made it very clear early in our marriage that family meant her family, and my job was to assimilate. I didn't plug in that USB drive right away. I couldn't. Instead, I set it on Michael's nightstand next to his reading glasses and his half-finished crossword puzzle book and the wedding photo he'd insisted on keeping there, even when I suggested maybe something more recent. I stared at it for 3 days while I sorted through sympathy casseroles and fielded phone calls and tried to explain to our 11-year-old daughter why Daddy wasn't coming home from the hospital this time. Emma had been so brave through all of it. Braver than me, honestly. She'd held my hand at the funeral and whispered, "It's okay to cry, Mom," while I stood there feeling nothing but a cold, hollow numbness that scared me more than grief ever could. Before I tell you what happened when I finally watched that video, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story resonates with you. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I have a feeling I'm not the only person who's ever discovered their entire reality was built on lies. Let me take you back to where it all began. I met Michael Chen in the summer of 2011 at a friend's rooftop party in downtown Portland. I was 27, working as a project manager for a mid-sized architecture firm, still young enough to believe that love conquered all, and family drama was something that happened to other people. He was 33, a software engineer with kind eyes and a laugh that made everyone in the room want to know what the joke was. He spilled his drink on my shoes within the first 5 minutes of conversation, apologized profusely, and then spent the next 3 hours making me laugh so hard my cheeks hurt. By the time the party ended, I knew I was in trouble. The good kind. The kind where your heart does that little flip thing and you start imagining what your kids might look like. Our first real date was at a tiny Vietnamese restaurant on Division Street. Michael ordered for both of us in broken Vietnamese that made the elderly owner smile, and I watched him charm everyone in that cramped little space with nothing but genuine warmth and terrible pronunciation. He told me about his family that night. His mother, Vivian, who'd immigrated from Hong Kong at 19 and built a successful real estate business from nothing. His father, Richard, a retired professor who spent most of his time in his home office writing papers nobody read. His older sister, Diana, who'd followed their mother into real estate and was, according to Michael, the successful one. He said it without bitterness, just as a statement of fact. Diana was the star. Michael was the backup. I should have paid more attention to how he described himself in relation to them. I should have noticed the way his shoulders dropped slightly when he mentioned his mother, or how his voice got quieter when Diana came up. But I was 27, and in love, and convinced that I was the person who would finally make him see his own worth. That's the trap, isn't it? Believing you can fix someone's family wounds with enough love. Believing that if you just try hard enough, sacrifice enough, give enough, they'll eventually see you as one of them. I met Vivian for the first time 3 months into dating Michael. He'd been nervous about it for weeks, coaching me on what to say and what not to say, what topics to avoid, what opinions to keep to myself. "She's traditional," he kept saying, like that word explained everything. "She has high expectations." I remember choosing my outfit so carefully that morning. A modest navy dress, simple pearl earrings, low heels. I wanted so badly to make a good impression, to show this woman that I was worthy of her son. We met at Vivian's house in the West Hills, a sprawling modern mansion that overlooked the city like a watchtower. Diana was there too, along with her husband Patrick and their 2 perfect children, Oliver and Sophia. Everyone was polished and put together in that effortless way that made my carefully chosen dress feel cheap. Vivian greeted me with a handshake instead of a hug and looked me up and down in a single sweeping glance that seemed to catalog every flaw I possessed. "Michael tells me you're a project manager," she said, making it sound like he'd told her I worked in a sewer. "That's practical?" Dinner was an interrogation disguised as polite conversation. Where did I grow up? Ohio? Where did I go to school? Ohio State. What did my parents do? My father was a high school principal, and my mother was a nurse. Vivian received each answer with a small nod that conveyed exactly nothing, while Diana exchanged glances with her husband that conveyed everything. I wasn't good enough. I wasn't from the right place, the right family, the right world. I was an outsider trying to break into a club that had never admitted new members. But Michael held my hand under the table the entire time. He squeezed my fingers every time his mother said something cutting, and when we left that night, he apologized in the car for a full 20 minutes. "She'll warm up," he promised. "She just needs time to see how amazing you are." I wanted so badly to believe him that I let myself be convinced. We got engaged 18 months later, and Vivian insisted on hosting the engagement party at her house. It was supposed to be a celebration, but it felt more like a job interview I hadn't studied for. Vivian had invited 80 of her closest friends and business associates, none of whom I knew, and spent the evening introducing me as Michael's fiancée, without ever once using my name. Diana cornered me by the champagne table to inform me that I really should consider getting my teeth whitened before the wedding photos. "It's just that you'll want to look your best," she said sweetly, "and those pictures last forever." I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that once we were married, once I proved myself, they would accept me. I was so young, so desperate to be loved by people who had already decided they never would. Our wedding was beautiful despite Vivian's best efforts to control every aspect of it. We got married at a botanical garden in September, surrounded by dahlias and falling leaves, and for one perfect afternoon, I actually felt like I belonged. Michael cried during his vows. My parents flew in from Ohio, and my mother held my face in her hands and told me she'd never seen me so happy. Even Vivian managed a tight smile during the reception, though Diana made sure to mention loudly that her wedding had been 3 times the size. The problem started almost immediately after the honeymoon. We'd been home for exactly 1 week when Vivian called to inform us that we'd be hosting Thanksgiving at our apartment. Not asked, informed. Michael agreed without consulting me, and when I expressed my frustration, he looked at me with those sad brown eyes and said, "It's just easier this way. You know how she gets." I would hear some version of that phrase at least 1,000 times over the next decade. It's just easier. You know how she is. It's not worth the fight. That first Thanksgiving set the template for every holiday that followed. I did all the cooking while Vivian supervised and criticized. I did all the cleaning while Diana sat on my couch and scrolled through her phone. I spent my own money on groceries and decorations and a tablecloth Vivian deemed acceptable. And at the end of the night, Michael's mother looked around our apartment and said, "Well, you certainly did your best with what you had to work with." I was 29 years old and already learning to make myself smaller. The financial requests started about 6 months into our marriage. At first, they seemed reasonable. Diana needed a bridge loan for a real estate deal that was taking longer to close than expected. Just $10,000. We'd get it back in 2 weeks. Michael agreed immediately, and I didn't argue because I assumed this was what families did. They helped each other. 2 weeks stretched into 2 months, stretched into, let's just call it, even for that time we helped you move. We never saw that money again. Then it was Vivian's turn. She needed $30,000 for an emergency home repair. The roof was leaking, and her contractor needed payment immediately. Michael wrote the check the same day from our joint savings account without even telling me until after it was done. "I'll tell you what," he said when I found out. "Once Mom sells the Henderson property, she'll pay us back double." The Henderson property sold 8 months later. We received nothing. Then Richard needed surgery, and their insurance didn't cover all of it, and could we possibly help with just $40,000? Then Diana's son Oliver needed braces and private tutoring and soccer camp, and somehow that became our responsibility too. Then Vivian's real estate business had a bad quarter, and she needed operating capital, and surely we could spare another $50,000 for the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise Michael. I started keeping track of it all in a spreadsheet because I couldn't believe the numbers when I tried to add them up in my head. By our 3rd anniversary, we'd given Michael's family over $170,000. Not loaned, given. Because not a single penny of it ever came back. I tried talking to Michael about it. I tried showing him the spreadsheet, the cold hard evidence of how much money was flowing out of our accounts and into theirs. He would get this look on his face, this pained expression like I was asking him to choose between me and them, and I always backed down. Always. Because I loved him and he loved his family. And I kept telling myself that this was what marriage meant. Compromise, sacrifice, putting your partner's needs ahead of your own. But it wasn't Michael's needs I was serving. It was Vivian's. It was Diana's. It was a family that saw me as nothing but a checkbook with legs. Emma was born in 2016, and I thought surely things would change now. I was the mother of their grandchild, their niece. I had given them something precious. But the day we brought Emma home from the hospital, Vivian showed up unannounced with Diana and a list of suggestions about what we were doing wrong. The nursery was too cold. The blankets were the wrong material. The bottles I'd chosen were inferior to the ones Diana had used. I was holding my day-old baby wrong, feeding her wrong, burping her wrong. Michael said nothing. He stood there in the doorway of our daughter's nursery while his mother and sister systematically dismantled every decision I'd made, and he said nothing. Later, after they left, he told me they were just trying to help. "They care," he said. "That's how they show it." I stopped trying to win Vivian's approval after that. Something inside me shifted, hardened. I still hosted the holidays and attended the family dinners and wrote the checks when Michael asked me to, but I stopped hoping it would ever be enough. I stopped believing I could ever be anything more than an outsider looking in. The The spreadsheet kept growing. 4 years after Emma was born, we'd given Michael's family $340,000. We'd refinanced our house twice to come up with the money. I was working 60-hour weeks at a job I hated because we couldn't afford for me to take any time off. And every time I tried to talk to Michael about it, every time I begged him to set boundaries, he looked at me with those sad eyes and said, "They're my family. What am I supposed to do?" I didn't have an answer, so I kept giving until there was nothing left to give. Michael was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer on March 15th, 2024, stage 4, inoperable. The doctor gave him 4 to 6 months, delivered with the clinical detachment of someone who had to say those words every day. I remember sitting in that sterile hospital room, holding Michael's hand, watching his face crumble as he processed the news. I remember thinking, with a clarity that seemed almost cruel, that I finally had an excuse to say no. We didn't tell his family right away. Michael wanted time to process, to figure out what he wanted to do with his remaining months, to say goodbye to Emma in his own way. We had 3 precious weeks of quiet, just the 3 of us, before Vivian started calling to ask why we'd missed Sunday dinner. Michael told her on the phone, and I could hear her wailing from across the room. Within an hour, she and Diana had descended on our house with casseroles and questions and an immediate plan to take over Michael's care. "He should come stay with us," Vivian declared, not 2 hours after learning her son was dying. "The guest house has plenty of room. I can hire a full-time nurse. It doesn't make sense for him to stay here. Here, in his own home, with his wife and daughter." "Mom, I'm not leaving my family," Michael said, and for one brief, shining moment, I thought maybe dying had finally given him the courage to stand up to her. I was wrong. What followed was a 3-month negotiation disguised as care. Vivian and Diana showed up at our house every single day, sometimes twice a day, to help. They rearranged our furniture without asking. They threw out food from our refrigerator because it didn't meet their standards. They criticized the way I was managing Michael's medications, the doctors I'd chosen, the hospice care I'd arranged. Diana once told me, in front of Michael's hospital bed, that if I really loved him, I'd let Vivian take over because some of us actually know how to care for a dying person. Michael was too sick to fight by then. The cancer was eating him from the inside out, and the pain medications made him foggy and confused. He slept most of the time, and when he was awake, he just wanted to hold Emma's hand and watch old movies on the TV I'd set up in our bedroom. I became a ghost in my own home, tiptoeing around Vivian's demands and Diana's criticisms while I tried to be present for my husband's final weeks. The money requests didn't stop just because Michael was dying. If anything, they intensified. Diana needed $50,000 for a property that was sure to triple in value. Vivian's business partner had embezzled from her, and she needed emergency funds. Oliver was applying to private high schools, and they needed help with the application fees. Each request came with the unspoken implication that this was what Michael would want, that I was somehow betraying his memory by even hesitating. I said no for the first time in 12 years, on June 3rd, 2024. Michael had been in hospice for 2 weeks, actively dying, barely conscious. Diana called me at 11 p.m. to ask for $75,000 for an investment opportunity that couldn't wait. I was sitting next to my husband's bed, listening to the terrible rattle of his breathing, counting the seconds between each exhale, and Diana was asking me for money. "No," I said. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Diana laughed, this incredulous little sound like I'd just told a joke she didn't understand. "I'm sorry. What?" I said, "No, Diana. I can't do this right now. I can't even think about this right now. Michael is dying." "I know Michael is dying," Diana snapped. "He's my brother." "But life doesn't stop just because someone is sick. This opportunity is time sensitive, And if you can't see past your own selfishness for 5 minutes to help your family, then maybe you don't deserve to be part of this family. I hung up on her. It was the first time I'd ever done that to anyone in Michael's family, and my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. Michael stirred in his bed, and for a moment his eyes seemed to focus on me. "Caroline?" he whispered, his voice like paper tearing. "I'm here," I said, taking his hand. "I'm right here." He squeezed my fingers weakly. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry." I thought he was apologizing for dying. I wouldn't understand what he was really apologizing for until 3 weeks later, in that hospice parking lot when the nurse pressed a USB drive into my palm and changed everything. Okay, I need to pause here for a second. Have you ever discovered something about your spouse that completely changed how you saw your entire relationship? Something that made you question every memory, every conversation, every moment you thought you understood? Type your answer in the comments. And if this story is hitting close to home, please hit that like button so more people can find it. Michael died on June 17th at 3:42 in the morning. I was holding his hand. Emma was asleep in the chair beside me, wrapped in the blanket her father had given her for her birthday. The hospice nurse came in to check on us and stopped in the doorway when she saw my face. She didn't need to ask. She just walked over and put her hand on my shoulder and stood there with me while the monitors flatlined and the room went quiet. The funeral was 5 days later. Vivian took over the planning because of course she did. She chose the casket, the flowers, the music, the readings. She decided who would speak and in what order. She wrote Michael's obituary without once mentioning me by name. I was his devoted wife. That was all. 12 years of marriage reduced to 3 words and a possessive pronoun. I sat in the front row with Emma and listened to Vivian sob her way through a eulogy that painted Michael as a saint and conveniently forgot every sacrifice we'd made for her. Diana spoke next, her voice trembling with rehearsed emotion, telling stories about their childhood that made Michael sound like a supporting character in her own narrative. Richard sat in the corner with his head bowed, crying silently, never once looking at me. Nobody asked if I wanted to speak. Nobody asked Emma if she wanted to say goodbye to her father in front of everyone. We were props in Vivian's performance, nothing more. After the burial, there was a reception at Vivian's house. I didn't want to go. Every cell in my body was screaming at me to take Emma and go home and never see any of these people again. But Michael would have wanted me to be there. Michael always wanted me to be there, even when being there cost me everything. It was at the reception that Diana pulled me aside and told me we needed to discuss Michael's assets. The body wasn't even cold in the ground, and she was already calculating what she was owed. "Mom and I have been talking," Diana said, her voice low and urgent. "And we think it makes sense for Michael's share of the family trust to go directly to Oliver and Sophia for their education. You understand?" I stared at her. Michael's share of what trust? Diana blinked at me. The family trust. The one Grandma Chen established before she died. Michael's portion is about $600,000. Since he's gone now, it should go to the next generation. The next Chen generation? She added pointedly. $600,000. Michael had never mentioned a family trust. In 12 years of marriage, through all the financial stress and the constant demands for money, and the twice refinanced house, he had never once mentioned that his family was sitting on $600,000 with his name on it. "What about Emma?" I asked. "She's Michael's daughter." Diana's lip curled slightly. "Emma isn't really... she's not a Chen by blood, is she? And with you remarrying eventually, we just think it's cleaner to keep the money in the family. The real family." I don't remember walking away from her. I don't remember finding my coat or telling Emma we were leaving or driving home through streets that blurred with tears I couldn't stop. I just remember sitting in my driveway afterward, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white and thinking, this is what 12 years of trying to belong got me. This is what giving everything earned me. Nothing. Less than nothing. The nurse found me the next morning. Her name was Patricia, and she'd been Michael's primary hospice nurse for the last month of his life. She was waiting in the parking lot when I arrived to sign the final paperwork, and the way she was clutching her purse told me she had something important to say. "Mrs. Chen," she said, "there's something I need to give you." I wasn't a Chen. I'd never changed my name, never even been invited to take it. But I didn't correct her. I just waited while she reached into her purse and pulled out a small black USB drive. "Your husband gave this to me," Patricia said. "The night before he passed. He was having a lucid moment, more aware than he'd been in days, and he asked if I could do something for him. He said I had to wait until after the funeral, until everyone had left, and then I had to find you and give you this. He made me promise." I took the drive. It was warm from being in her purse and lighter than I expected. "Did he say what was on it?" Patricia shook her head. "Just that you needed to see it, and that he was sorry." She paused, and something flickered across her face. "He cried when he said it. Whatever's on there, it mattered to him. It mattered a lot." I drove straight home with that USB drive burning a hole in my pocket. Emma was at school. The house was empty. I sat down at Michael's desk, the one where he'd worked for 12 years, surrounded by his books and his coffee mugs and the photos of our family, and I plugged the drive into his computer. There was one file on it. A video file titled, "For Caroline, I'm Sorry." I clicked play. Michael's face filled the screen, gaunt and gray and nothing like the man I'd married. He was propped up in his hospice bed, and I recognized the angle. He must have recorded this on his phone, held it himself the night before he died. His hands were shaking, and his eyes were red-rimmed, and when he spoke, his voice cracked like old wood. "Caroline," he said, "my Caroline. I don't have much time left, and there are things I need to tell you. Things I should have told you years ago. Things I was too much of a coward to say out loud while I was still alive to face the consequences." He paused, and I could see him gathering his strength, marshaling whatever clarity the pain medications had left him. "Everything my family told you about our finances was a lie." I stopped breathing. The room seemed to tilt around me. "The family trust Diana probably already mentioned to you, it exists. It's real. But my share isn't $600,000. It's $2.4 million. My grandmother left it to me specifically because she knew what my mother was like. She knew Diana would bleed me dry if she could. So she put it in a trust that only I could access, with provisions that keep my mother's hands off it completely. $2.4 million. We'd refinanced our house twice. I'd worked 60-hour weeks for a decade. We'd given his family over $400,000 of our own money. And this whole time, Michael had been sitting on $2.4 million that his family couldn't touch. "I know what you're thinking," Michael said on the screen, as if he could see my face. "Why didn't I use it? Why did I let you work yourself to death while I had this safety net hidden away?" He closed his eyes. "Because my mother told me if I ever touched that money, she'd disown me. She said it was dirty money, that my grandmother had earned it through shady deals, and I'd be a disgrace to use it. She said if I cared about family honor, I'd pretend it didn't exist and let it pass to the next generation." He laughed bitterly. I believed her. I was 45 years old when I got that diagnosis, and I still believed every word my mother said like I was a little boy afraid of disappointing her. I let her convince me that providing for my wife and daughter was less important than keeping her approval. I let you suffer because I was too weak to stand up to her." Tears were streaming down my face now, but I couldn't look away from the screen. "But that's not the worst of it," Michael continued. "The money we gave my family over the years, the bridge loans and emergency repairs and business investments. Caroline, my mother's real estate business, has been worth over $20 million for the last 15 years. She never needed a dime from us. Neither did Diana. The requests were never about money. They were tests. They were my mother's way of seeing how much control she still had over me, and by extension, over you. Every check we wrote was proof that she'd won." I felt like I was going to be sick. "There's a folder on this drive," Michael said. "Bank statements, property records, tax returns, everything you need to see the full picture of what they did to us. And there's a letter from my grandmother's attorney explaining the terms of the trust. It's all yours now, Caroline. Every penny. My mother can't touch it, Diana can't challenge it, and if they try, there's enough documentation in that folder to prove fraud and financial manipulation going back decades." He was crying now, too, tears cutting tracks down his wasted cheeks. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't deserve that, but I am asking you to protect yourself and Emma. Don't let them take anything else from you. Don't let them rewrite history the way they always do. I spent my whole life being their good son, their obedient puppet, and all it got me was dying alone with a wife who deserves so much better than what I gave her." He reached toward the camera like he was trying to touch me through the screen. "I love you. I loved you from the moment you laughed at my terrible Vietnamese at that restaurant on our first date. And I'm so sorry I never loved you enough to choose you over them. You were always the best thing in my life, Caroline. I just wish I'd been brave enough to show it." The video ended. I sat there in the silence of Michael's empty office, staring at the frozen image of his face, and felt something inside me shatter and rebuild at the same time. My husband had spent 12 years lying to me. 12 years watching me struggle and sacrifice and give everything I had to a family that saw me as nothing but a mark. 12 years choosing his mother's approval over his wife's well-being. But in the end, from his deathbed, he'd finally told the truth, and he'd given me everything I needed to burn it all down. I spent the next 3 days going through the folder Michael had left on that drive. There were bank statements going back to 2008, showing the steady growth of Vivian's real estate empire. Tax returns documenting Diana's portfolio of investment properties worth over $8 million. Property records proving that the emergency roof repair Vivian had needed our $30,000 for had actually been paid in full by her insurance company 2 weeks before she asked us for money. Financial statements showing that Diana's bridge loan was requested the same month she'd purchased a vacation home in Palm Springs for $750,000 in cash. Every single request they'd made had been a lie. Every single check we'd written had gone to people who never needed it and never intended to pay it back. I also found the letter from Michael's grandmother's attorney. The trust was ironclad. Michael had been the sole beneficiary while he was alive, and upon his death, everything transferred to his surviving spouse and any children. Vivian had no claim to any of it. Neither did Diana. Neither did their precious grandchildren, who were apparently more real family than my daughter. I made copies of everything. I scanned every document, saved every file in 3 separate locations, and then I called the attorney whose name was on that letter. His name was Wallace Pemberton, and he was 73 years old with a law practice that specialized in estate planning and family trusts. When I told him who I was and why I was calling, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I've been waiting for this call for 22 years. Mrs. Chen, your husband's grandmother, was one of the most remarkable women I ever knew. and she would have been heartbroken to learn what her daughter did with the legacy she left behind. We met the next day at his office downtown. Wallace showed me documents that went back to Michael's grandmother's death in 2002. She had established the trust specifically because she knew Vivian would try to control her son's inheritance. She had included provisions that prevented any family member from challenging the trust or claiming a portion of it. And she had left a letter for Michael, which Vivian had intercepted and hidden before he ever knew it existed. Wallace handed me a yellowed envelope with Michael's name written on it in faded blue ink. "I made a copy before I gave the original to Vivian," he said. "I suspected even then that she would never let him see it." I opened the letter with shaking hands. "My dearest Michael," it began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and my daughter has done exactly what I expected her to do. She has tried to make you feel guilty for existing, for having needs, for wanting a life that doesn't revolve entirely around her. Please know that every word she has ever spoken to diminish you is a lie. You are not the backup. You are not the lesser child. You are my grandson, and you are exactly enough. I have left you this money not as a reward, but as protection. Use it to build a life with someone who sees your worth. Use it to stand on your own 2 feet. And if you find someone who loves you for who you are rather than what you can provide, hold on to them with both hands and never let go. Your mother will tell you this money is tainted. She will tell you that accepting it means betraying your family. But Michael, family is not about control. Family is not about manipulation or guilt or endless sacrifice on the altar of someone else's ego. Family is about love, freely given and freely received. I believe in you, my darling boy. I always have. All my love, Grandmother Chen." I sat in Wallace's office and cried for 20 minutes straight. All those years, all that suffering. Michael's grandmother had seen everything clearly 20 years before any of it happened. She tried to protect him, to give him the tools to break free. And Vivian had stolen that protection before Michael ever knew it existed. "What do I do now?" I asked Wallace when I could finally speak. He slid a folder across his desk. "Now we protect what's rightfully yours. But first I think we need to have a conversation with your mother-in-law." I didn't want to see Vivian. The thought of being in the same room with her made my skin crawl. But Wallace convinced me that a face-to-face confrontation, with witnesses, with evidence, was the only way to ensure she couldn't rewrite history later. And I owed it to Michael, the real Michael, the one who'd finally found his courage at the very end, the one who trusted me to finish what he couldn't. I called Vivian that night and told her we needed to discuss Michael's estate. She agreed immediately, probably already counting the money she assumed she'd be getting. We scheduled a family meeting for the following Sunday at her house. "Bring Diana and Richard," I said. "This concerns all of us." I didn't sleep at all the night before that meeting. I lay in my empty bed, staring at the ceiling, going over and over what I was going to say. Emma was spending the weekend with my parents, who'd flown in from Ohio the moment I'd called them with the truth about what Michael's family had done. My mother had cried for an hour. My father had offered to come to the meeting and give that woman a piece of my mind. I'd thanked them both, but said this was something I needed to do myself. Sunday morning dawned gray and cold, more like November than late June. I put on the nicest outfit I owned, a charcoal suit I'd bought for business presentations, and I drove to Vivian's house with Wallace following in his own car. He'd agreed to come as my legal representative and witness. He'd also agreed to bring copies of every document Michael's grandmother had left. Diana's car was already in the driveway when I arrived. Of course she was early. She probably wanted to get there before me, to strategize with Vivian, to plan whatever manipulation they decided on. I parked on the street and waited for Wallace to catch up before walking to the front door. Vivian answered before I could knock. She was dressed in black, the picture of a grieving mother with tasteful pearl earrings and just the right amount of subdued makeup. "Caroline," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "Thank you so much for coming. We have so much to discuss." We. Like she and I were on the same team, like we'd ever been on the same team. The living room was staged like a courtroom. Vivian sat in the largest chair, positioned like a throne at the head of the room. Diana and Patrick were on the sofa to her right. Richard sat alone in a corner, as usual, avoiding eye contact with everyone. I took the seat directly across from Vivian, and Wallace settled in beside me with his briefcase on his lap. "Before we begin," Vivian said, "I just want you to know how much we all appreciate everything you did for Michael during his illness. You were a devoted wife." She paused meaningfully. "Whatever else happens, no one can take that away from you." "All right, I want to check in with you again. If you were in my position right now, sitting across from the woman who had manipulated your husband for his entire life and stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from your family, would you have stayed calm? Or would you have lost it completely? Type yes or no in the comments. I want to know what you would have done. And if you're dying to see what happens next, make sure you're subscribed." I looked at Vivian, at her perfect makeup and her sympathetic expression, and the way her hands were folded in her lap like she was posing for a portrait of benevolent grief. And I said, "Thank you, Vivian. But I think we should start by talking about the family trust." The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. Diana straightened on the sofa. Patrick suddenly found his shoes very interesting, and Vivian's expression flickered, just for a moment, into something hard and calculating before smoothing back into concern. "Of course," she said. "Diana mentioned she'd discussed that with you at the reception. We've given it a lot of thought, and we really do think the best thing for Michael's memory is to make sure his share goes to the next generation of Chens. Oliver and Sophia will put it to such good use, and Michael's share of the trust is $2.4 million, I said. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Diana's face went pale. Vivian's mask slipped completely, revealing the sharp-edged fury underneath. Even Richard looked up from the corner, his eyes wide. "I don't know where you heard that," Vivian started, but I was already reaching into my bag. "I heard it from Michael," I said. "He recorded a video for me before he died. He told me everything about the trust, about your real estate empire worth $20 million, about how you never needed a single penny of the $437,000 we gave you over the last 12 years. I pulled out the folder and set it on the coffee table. He also gave me documentation, bank statements, tax returns, property records, including the insurance payout you received for your roof 2 weeks before you asked us for $30,000 to repair it." Diana stood up so fast she nearly knocked over the side table. "This is ridiculous. You can't just come in here and accuse us of—" "I'm not accusing anyone of anything," I said calmly. "I'm stating facts. The trust exists. Michael was the sole beneficiary. According to the terms established by his grandmother, the entire balance transferred to me and Emma upon his death. This is Wallace Pemberton, the attorney who helped Mrs. Chen Sr. establish the trust 22 years ago. He can confirm everything I've said." Wallace nodded and opened his briefcase. "The documentation is extensive and unambiguous. Mr. Chen's share of the family trust, currently valued at $2.47 million, belongs entirely to his widow and daughter. There is no legal mechanism by which any other family member could claim it." Vivian's face had gone from pale to an alarming shade of red. "That money was supposed to stay in the family," she hissed. "My mother had no right to exclude me from my own son's inheritance. Your mother, Wallace said mildly, had every right to distribute her assets as she saw fit, and she chose to protect her grandson from exactly this kind of manipulation. Manipulation? Vivian stood up now, too, her careful composure completely gone. I am Michael's mother. I raised him. I sacrificed everything for him. And now you're going to sit here and tell me that his widow, this outsider, gets to steal what belongs to our family? Vivian. Richard spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but steady. Sit down. Everyone turned to look at him. Richard, who never spoke up. Richard, who spent every family gathering hiding in corners and avoiding conflict. Richard, who hadn't said more than 10 words to me in 12 years of marriage. I said sit down, he repeated, and stop embarrassing yourself. Vivian's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Diana looked like she'd been slapped. Patrick was edging toward the door like he was looking for an escape route. Richard stood up from his corner chair and walked to the middle of the room. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, stooped and tired, but there was something in his eyes I'd never noticed before, something that looked almost like relief. I've spent 47 years watching you do this, he said to Vivian, 47 years of manipulation and control and turning our children against each other. I watched you convince Michael that he was never good enough, that he had to earn your love with money and obedience and endless sacrifice. I watched you steal his grandmother's letter before he could read it. I watched you lie to him about the trust for over 2 decades. Richard, Vivian started. I'm not finished. His voice was harder now, sharper. I watched you destroy our son's marriage piece by piece. I watched you take money from him and Caroline that they couldn't afford to give, money that you never needed and never intended to return. I watched you treat his wife like a servant and his daughter like an inconvenience. And I said nothing. I did nothing, because that was easier than standing up to you. He turned to me, and there were tears on his face. Caroline, I am so sorry for all of it, for every dinner I sat through while Vivian criticized you, for every phone call I didn't make, for every time I should have defended you and didn't. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to feel. This was the first time Richard had ever acknowledged me as anything more than furniture. You don't get to do this, Diana snapped at her father. You don't get to suddenly grow a conscience now that Michael's dead and turn on your own family. You're right, Richard said quietly. I should have done it years ago, decades ago. Maybe if I had, Michael wouldn't have spent his whole life trying to earn approval he was never going to get. Maybe he wouldn't have married a wonderful woman and then been too afraid to put her first. Maybe he would have actually used his grandmother's money to build a life instead of letting it sit there while he worked himself into an early grave. The room was completely silent. Even Vivian seemed shocked into stillness. Richard reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. I've been carrying this around for 3 weeks, trying to decide what to do with it. It's a letter from Michael. He wrote it the week before he died and asked me to give it to you, Caroline, but only if I finally grew a spine. Those were his exact words. He handed me the envelope. My name was written on the front in Michael's handwriting, the familiar scrawl I'd seen on grocery lists and birthday cards, and the sticky notes he used to leave on my coffee mug. I opened it right there, in front of everyone. My Caroline, it began. If you're reading this, it means my father actually did something brave for once. I hope you know how much that cost him. I hope you know that whatever he says to you today, he means it. I spent my whole life being afraid of my mother. I let that fear destroy everything good I ever had. But in these last weeks, watching you care for me, watching you put your own grief aside to make sure I was comfortable, I've realized something I should have understood years ago. You were always my family, Caroline. You and Emma. You were the only ones who ever loved me just for being me. and I wasted so much time trying to earn love from people who were never capable of giving it. I'm leaving you everything, not just the trust, but everything. My share of the house, my retirement accounts, my life insurance, all of it. My mother is going to fight you. Diana is going to make your life hell. But I've talked to Wallace, and he's going to help you protect yourself. There's something else in the folder he's bringing, something I discovered about my mother's business 3 years ago and never had the courage to do anything about. It's why she's been so desperate for cash lately, why the requests got bigger and more urgent. She's been hiding losses from her investors for almost a decade. If the truth comes out, she loses everything. Her business, her reputation, maybe her freedom. I'm not telling you this so you can destroy her. I'm telling you because I want you to understand the power you now hold. Use it however you see fit. Forgive her if you can. Expose her if you must. But whatever you decide, please know that you don't owe her anything. You never did. I love you. I will always love you. And I'm so sorry it took me dying to finally tell you the truth. Forever yours, Michael. I looked up from the letter. Vivian was watching me with something that looked almost like fear. For the first time in 12 years, she wasn't looking at me like I was beneath her notice. She was looking at me like I was a threat. "Wallace," I said, "what's in the rest of that folder?" Wallace pulled out a thick stack of documents and laid them on the coffee table. Evidence of accounting irregularities in Chen Properties, LLC, spanning the last 9 years, falsified profit statements to investors, misreported losses to the IRS, what amounts to approximately $3.2 million in fraud. Diana sat down heavily on the sofa. Patrick was already on his phone, probably texting his own lawyer. Vivian's face had gone from red to gray, the color of old ash. "Where did you get those?" she whispered. "Michael was your company's IT consultant for 6 years," Wallace said. "He had access to everything. He made copies 3 years ago when he first noticed the discrepancies, and he's been adding to the file ever since. He brought it to me 2 weeks before he died and asked me to keep it safe." "This is—" Diana started, then stopped. I'd never seen her at a loss for words before. "This is blackmail." "No," I said. "This is insurance. And unless you want to spend the next 5 to 10 years in federal prison, you're going to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say." I stood up because I wanted to look down at Vivian for once instead of the other way around. "In the last 12 years, you've taken $437,000 from me and Michael. You treated me like a servant in my own home. You excluded me from my own husband's funeral planning. You tried to steal my daughter's inheritance the day after we buried her father. And you had the audacity to tell me that Emma isn't really part of your family." Vivian opened her mouth, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished. You stole a letter from your own son that might have changed his entire life. You manipulated him into believing he was worthless unless he was giving you money. You let him die thinking he'd failed you, when the truth is you failed him every single day of his life." I picked up the folder of fraud evidence. "This is going back into Wallace's safe. I'm not going to turn you in. I'm not going to destroy your business. But here's what's going to happen instead." I counted off on my fingers. 1, you're going to repay every penny you took from us over the last 12 years. That's $437,000 plus interest. Wallace will send you a payment schedule. 2, you're going to establish an educational trust for Emma in the amount of $500,000 to be managed independently by a third party of my choosing. 3, you're going to write a letter to Emma to be given to her when she's 18, telling her the truth about who her father was and how much he loved her. Not the version where you were the hero and he was the disappointment. The real truth. 4, You're never going to contact me or Emma again unless we contact you first. No phone calls, no letters, no showing up at school events or birthday parties. If I see you on the street, you will cross to the other side. 5. And this is the most important one. I looked directly into Vivian's eyes. You're going to spend the rest of your life knowing that your son finally saw you clearly. He knew what you were, and in the end, he chose me. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Vivian spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. And if I refuse? I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I'd felt on my face since Michael died. Then Wallace will be having a very interesting conversation with the SEC and the IRS tomorrow morning. Your choice. Vivian looked around the room, at Diana's pale face and Patrick's hunched shoulders and Richard's steady gaze. She looked at the folder of evidence in my hands. She looked at me, really looked at me, like she was seeing me for the first time. And then she nodded. Fine, she said. You win. I picked up my bag and walked toward the door. At the threshold, I turned back one more time. I didn't win, Vivian. There's no winning when someone you love is dead. But you lost. You lost your son years ago, and you were too busy counting your money to notice. Now you've lost his daughter, too. I hope whatever you thought you were gaining was worth it. I walked out of that house, and I never looked back. The months that followed were both the hardest and the most peaceful of my life. Emma and I moved into a new house, a smaller one without any memories of her father's family attached to it. I quit my job and started my own project management consulting firm, using some of the trust money to get it off the ground. My parents visited for 3 weeks and helped us settle in, and my mother made me promise to call more often. Wallace handled all the financial arrangements with Vivian's family. She paid back every penny, on time, without complaint. The educational trust for Emma was established